So in our next session, Navigating the Future of Higher Ed, we are going to explore the road ahead and how you can meet students where they are. And this panel is going to be moderated by my colleague, Andy Kijinski. But don't forget, throughout the session, scan the QR code at the bottom right-hand corner, because that's your way to ask speakers questions. So I want to bring up my colleague, Andy. Hey, Andy.
Chantel, how's it going?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing well. That Lauren talk was incredible. She's such a great speaker. I loved the story.
I know, at 30 years old, just having the dream to be in the Olympics, that is amazing.
Yeah, it was a really, really great story.
But before I kick it over to you, Andy, to moderate this panel, I want to ask you, what does In Good Company mean to you?
In good company to me. So I really feel that it's rooted in trust. We talk about trust a lot, and where we kind of define it is this combination between consistency and time, staying consistent over time. So our focus is on how can we bring that to life and maintain trust with our clients and our members in a way that helps us all achieve the common goals we have.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm looking forward to your panel, so I will just let you take it away.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Chantel. So as Chantel mentioned, this next panel, we are going to explore the future of higher education and how you can meet your students where they are at. So I'm going to pull up two experts within the field. Speaking of good company, we have Elizabeth Scarborough Johnson and Michael Horn. Elizabeth and Michael, how are you two doing?
Doing just great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So I am first going to give everybody a little bit of background on you two, and then we are going to get some hot off the press research from Elizabeth that Chantel had alluded to earlier. So first things first, introductions. First up is Michael Horn. So Michael, after reading through his background, you guys might think that there's two Michael Horns doing the jobs of one, but in fact, there's a lot of things he's involved in. So first, he is the senior strategist at Guild Education and a co-founder of the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. He's also the author of several books, his most recent being Choosing College, which we'll touch on in a little bit, as well as serving on the board of several educational organizations, including the Robin Hood Learning and Tech Fund and the Learn Launch Institute. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much.
And next up, Elizabeth. So Elizabeth founded Simpson Scarborough in 2006, really with the vision of creating a higher ed agency that puts research at the center of marketing strategies. Very well rounded in the industry, presented at over 200 workshops with any type of higher education institution you can imagine. So she really spans the gamut of researching techniques, brand strategies, marketing metrics, and ROI identification. So thank you so much for being here as well, Elizabeth.
My pleasure.
All right, so I am going to pass it over to Elizabeth now to run through some initial findings in the research.
All right. Well, if it were an option, I would like to yield my time to Lauren Gibbs because she was fascinating, honestly. Is that allowed? Because I think she was just terrific, and I'd love to hear more from her. But let's go ahead and pull up this PowerPoint so I can share the findings. I think someone's pulling that up for us. All right. Can everyone see that? Is it up on the screen, Andy?
Yes, I can see it now. Yep.
Oh, okay. I don't think I can. Hold on a second. There we go. Okay, I got it. All right, so we had the great pleasure of conducting this research on prospective adult students with LinkedIn, and we're going to do a full download of these findings on December 3rd, so make sure to look out for an email about that and join us to go into a deep dive of these findings. But we're going to kick off today with just a couple of highlights that we think are really interesting about the study. So what we did was we surveyed just over 1,200 adults aged 25 to 55. Some were LinkedIn members, but many were not. We wanted to get sort of a full representation of this population nationwide. And we asked them a whole bunch of questions about their future plans for higher education. We wanted to see what percentage of them were even considering higher ed, what factors were important to them in making choices about where they wanted to go to school and what they wanted to study. And then we specifically wanted to get at how COVID was impacting their decisions. So this data is hot off the presses. We just collected the data at the end of August and early September. So you're seeing here firsthand what some of the key findings are. So jumping in, you can really see here that demand for education has grown. When we asked adults, how has your interest in pursuing higher education changed since COVID, right? So this is, how has it changed since COVID, just very recently? 47% of all of the adults that we studied said that their interest had actually increased, which is a huge number. And you can see it's actually, it's 9 percentage points higher for LinkedIn members compared to non-LinkedIn members. Obviously LinkedIn conducted this study, so they really wanted to understand how their members compare to the general population. And one of the things that we found very, very consistently is that they have LinkedIn members have even more interest in higher education than the general population as a whole. And they're actually more serious about pursuing it in the very near term future. So here's the really interesting bit that's actually not on this slide. To participate in this study, adults had to say that they had at least some interest in going back to college in some form or another, within the next 5 years or so. And so, that weeded out about a third of the population that just said, oh, I'm not that interested. So all of the 1,200 or so respondents to this survey said, yes, I am interested in higher education within the next 5 years. And now we're saying fully half of those are saying my interest has increased since COVID occurred. So there's some real momentum here in terms of the interest in higher education among the US adult population. All right. If we look on this next slide, we're seeing a real compelling data about the interest in pursuing online education. So when we ask people how likely they are to pursue either online, in-person, or hybrid in the middle options, you can see the dramatic difference here in terms of how many adults are really saying that online is their preference. 80% interested in online compared to just 52% in in-person and hybrid, of course, in the middle of where you would expect it to be. What's interesting too is if we ask how their interest has changed since COVID, again, so we can really get a sense of the impact of the pandemic, you can see here in the blue here for online, there's much more, a much stronger increase in interest in online since COVID and a big decrease in interest in person since that happened. It's exactly what you would expect given the circumstances, but fascinating to just see the magnitude of the difference there. So here's another interesting point. So of all of these adults who are, again, all considering higher education within the next 5 years or so, 67%, fully 2/3, are actively considering and researching their options. That's an enormous population. 2/3 saying right now, I am online, I'm looking for these programs, I'm talking to my friends and family, and I am really thinking seriously about my educational options. And so if we look to the right, we can see now we capture here, what their plans are in terms of timing. 53% hope to enroll within the next 6 months. So again, this is just reinforcing this trend that we often see when we're in the midst of a recession, when a lot of people are out of work, that there's very active interest in pursuing higher education among the adult population. So what do they want to pursue? Well, a little bit of everything, right? If you look here, you can see when we ask them, what type of programmatic offerings they're interested in, and we look at, somewhat interested and very interested combined, taking 4-credit courses, earning a 4-credit certificate. Those come out the highest, but really everything that we asked about is above 50%. Right. And so there's interest across the board in all of these different, 4-credit and even not for credit options that we tested. And here's another one where real clearly we can see the difference between LinkedIn members and non-LinkedIn members, right? These percentages all go way up for LinkedIn members as compared to those who aren't using the platform. Okay. And finally, if we look at, what's impacting people's decisions, we know that affordability comes up on top. Probably every time we ask, what is it that's important to you when selecting an institution? It's not surprising to see that there. But then also looking for a flexible platform, a high quality institution. You can sort of see everything here at the top is really what's influencing their decisions most. And so we should be thinking about how to weave those messages ideas around those points into our marketing. Also important to mention what's down at the bottom, right? These are things that we can talk about less because they're just not as important, not as motivating to our prospective students. I mean, what's interesting about a question like this one is that, we put all of these response options in front of the survey respondent, and we allow them to pick as many as they want. So they could have marked every single one of these options and said, yeah, that's important, but they don't do that. There's real variability here in terms of what is and isn't important, and you don't want to waste any of your time talking about much of this at the bottom because it's just not motivating to them. So another quick data point here is 55% of the respondents, when we asked them about the desired benefits of additional education, increasing their earning potential, came right up at the top. That's not the only thing that's important to them, but it's one of the most important things. So that's really important to understand. So putting all of this together, it's interesting. There are actually a lot of, right now in particular, both positive and negative pressures sort of affecting adult student enrollment. On the one hand, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, millions of people have been laid off. More layoffs are being announced every day. Even people who've been able to rejoin the workforce, or they may be unsettled, not necessarily in exactly the job that they want or exactly the industry that they want. We're in the midst of an economic crisis. Family finances are stretched to the limits, and parents have turned into their kids' teachers, and who even has the time or the money to go back to school? But on the other hand, we know for a fact that part-time enrollment in particular of adult students typically goes up when there's a recession or a lot of people out of work. Think about the 700,000 women, it was reported earlier this week, 700,000 women have left the workforce in the last 6 months. Those women are going to get it together and come back with force, and they're going to want to get more education to expand their skill set, finish a degree or a certificate. So the market for adult learners is enormous. And here's another interesting thing. I just mentioned that, earning potential was one of the things that's most important to them. But in a separate question, when we asked adults why they wanted to get a degree, actually the most common answer was for personal interest or enrichment. Right behind that was, learning, updating skills to advance in their career, something more practical. But the top answer was for personal enrichment and personal interest. So adults want these degrees so that they can move their career forward, but earning these degrees is also very, very personal. It contributes to their personal happiness and their sense of well-being. And so it's been really interesting to study this population. And, this bottom line here, is sort of the summary statement of our So those are the highlights of the study. And with that, I'll throw it back to Andy so we can have a little discussion.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I'm not sure if just the last mention there got cut off, but either way, I mean, excellent findings there and some really key trends that you were able to uncover with the research. So my first question, just to kind of follow up on that, was thinking about some of those trends you mentioned, the move to online, higher interest education, thinking about personal enrichment, as well as increasing your opportunity for earnings. What are the short and long-term trends there? Which ones of these are here to stay, and which ones are more short-term within the next year or two?
Well, it's interesting because one of the trends that our research reinforced is that demand for online remote instruction, of course, continues to be very, very strong. It appears to be even getting stronger. Remember, preference for online instruction is 80% compared to just 52% for in-person, and then hybrid, of course, being in the middle. This could be a bit of a short-term phenomenon, right, associated with the pandemic. We need to be watching out for a whiplash in interest in more hybrid and in-person instruction as we move past the pandemic. I mean, we all know that birthday parties online and happy hours online are fun, but not the same. And when we're allowed to have birthday parties in person, again, watch out, they're going to be megapaloozas, right? The same thing could happen with in-person instruction. We could see a resurgence of demand for it once we're allowed to actually be in the same room with our professors and with our fellow students. So that's that boost in interest in online could be a little bit of a short term. We want to watch for that and pay attention to it. The second trend that our research reinforces is the importance of visibility building. It remains very difficult to get attention in the crowded marketplace that is adult higher education. I mean, we asked adults to name institutions that they believed were excellent providers of online education. A third of the respondents couldn't name any school. And there was only one school that was named in the double digits. Every other school was in the single digits. Most were in, at 1% or below. It is very difficult to build visibility with this audience. And so, it really takes a consistent and integrated and persistent strategy to build that visibility. So now is not the time to take your foot off the pedal, because we do not expect that to change in the future. That need to focus on visibility building is a long-term trend, and it will persist.
That's an excellent point. I love the similarity between the focus on online happy hours and birthday parties and the changes those will likely bring. Michael, I'd love to get your perspective, just knowing how much work you've done on motivators when thinking about the research that Elizabeth just presented and kind of the perspective she shared. Does that align with what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It aligns a lot. I think in the research, you're basically seeing what we would call two different jobs to be done that adult learners are hiring higher education to do for them. One of them would be help me step it up, right? Like what I'm doing right now, this isn't who I am. I can't keep going this way. I've got to make a change. And you see that in some of the unemployment numbers that are motivating people to look for something else. They want to step it up in their lives, earn more money, and higher education is that pathway. And affordability, flexibility, convenience, speed to degree, those are all really important things. And then the second job that I think is in that research as well is what we would call help me extend myself. And this is that personal enrichment coming through, right, that Elizabeth talked about, which is people saying, life is perhaps not terrible right now, but I've always wanted to learn X, or I've wanted to challenge myself, or I've wanted to prove to myself that I can do this. And now I have the time and budget where I can open this up and make this trade-off so that I'm going to get more higher education and pursue this dream I've had. And that's where that personal enrichment really, I think, lands. And so understanding that, the motivators fit very neatly into the research. And from my big perspective, folks are saying, hey, online's where it's at right now. That's how I can make progress in my life.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, I think Lauren was a perfect example of the reinvention and the invigoration it takes to change course. So definitely makes sense. Elizabeth, just quickly, one last thing on the research side. Was anything surprising to you? I'm sure you come into these with your own hypotheses on what the results might look like, but was anything in particular surprising?
Yeah, two things in particular jumped out. First of all, friends and family are the second most important resource when an adult is looking for information about getting more education. The first is actual, websites for, educational providers, colleges and universities. But friends and family are number two. It's ahead of events, print materials that you might be sending them, videos that you're producing, much more important than all of that. So colleges and universities need to think very carefully about ways to stimulate and harness word of mouth. Word of mouth is not something that happens by accident. I have a lot of clients who will say, oh, well, word of mouth, that's just, sort of out of our control. That's just the marketplace talking. No. It is not outside of your control. You have to give your happy customers the tools and the encouragement that they need to recommend your institution. It's important because people trust people. They trust their peers, right? So things like adding more influencer content to your social platforms like LinkedIn, really, really, really important. And to think about how to really incorporate word of mouth because it's the number two influencer. I mean, it should be a real priority for everyone. The second thing that jumped out, now this is really going to surprise you, I bet. The second thing that jumped out is there, to me, was a surprising percentage of adults who actually said they are more able to pay for college now than before COVID. Fascinating, right? Now, Let me make sure you understand the findings. 44% of adults actually told us that COVID had a negative impact on their ability to pay for additional education. But 28% said that COVID actually put them in a better position to pay for education. I actually thought that was surprising. So 56%, if you put the 28% who said it had a positive impact, the rest had no impact. So over half of adults are either in the same position to pay or a better position to pay. That certainly bodes well for institutions that cater to adult students, and I thought that was really surprising.
That is very surprising. Yeah, I think the natural reaction is probably it's going to be a tough time to afford it. The reinvention makes sense. The online component makes sense, but the money might be a hard component to it. So that's very surprising. Michael, have you seen that in any of the research or the institutions you've spoken with?
Frankly, that's the first time I've heard that data point, but I think, that's speaking probably to those students who are saying, hey, life is okay right now. This is the personal enrichment opportunity. Whereas there's another segment and their circumstances look very different. And so I think that speaks to the schools that as you're trying to market and reach these students, know which students you're talking to and try to segment them to be able to be speaking in their circumstance, right? If you're sitting there saying, life's good, you have more money to pay for higher ed, and you're talking to someone who just got laid off, you're obviously missing the boat significantly, and vice versa as well. You want to know where that student is in their own trajectory and target them accordingly. Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. And Michael, I wanted to touch on, you alluded to this before, and one of the perspectives I love within your book is the idea of not basing college on the job you want after college, but instead thinking about why are you hiring college? What job are you hiring college to do for you to advance your career or yourself? Could you speak a little bit to that as a paradigm shift and how marketers should be thinking about that to engage with prospective students?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I've been giving a lot of thought to recently in particular, because the traditional way we tend to segment the adult learner population is students who are coming back to switch jobs, to maybe move forward in their career path is a second one, to get a pay raise, is maybe a third, things like that are very functional, but they ignore the social and emotional dimensions of why they're choosing to go back to school now. Like, why is now the time? And really situating yourself in there is another dimension to understand the progress that someone's trying to make and what is that circumstance that's compelling them to choose right now. I think what you heard in Elizabeth's research is, if I got this number right, 67% of students are in what I would call active looking phase, right? Like they're blue sky right now. They're looking at everything and trying to figure it out. And there's always going to be this time wall is what we think of it, or this trigger event that sends them into deciding mode and helps you understand by when do they have to make this decision. And that's when they make trade-offs in all of this. And for a marketer, you really want to understand, again, where is that learner in their own timeline? Where are they in their own circumstance? So that it's not simply, oh, you want to switch jobs, but oh, you want to switch jobs because someone in your life is pushing you to do that. Or you want to switch jobs because you just can't keep paying rent and you have a kid on the way, right? Those circumstances are very different from the one who says, hey, I want to switch jobs because I've always dreamt of this and now I have the time to see if I can go do it. That's a very different emotional and social situation to be in. And you really want to understand those motivating circumstances, not just the functional reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a bit about doing the research to understand the audience, but also to make sure that the messaging aligns with the goals that people have in the situations that they're currently in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just acknowledging that it's not just the first goal that they say, right? You want to understand that context really that they're in. And the more you can identify in their context, their situation, and with those emotional and social reasons they're doing something, the better you can reach them and that they'll see your school and them as the perfect match.
Yep. Yeah, Elizabeth, I would love to get your perspective on the marketing side of things as well. So generally, same question. When thinking about the research, what we've kind of discussed here today, how should online programs be thinking about appealing to this audience?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just yesterday I did a live session with my friend TJ Logan at the P3 Higher Ed Summit. He's awesome. If you don't know him, he does a podcast called The Placemakers. If you haven't seen it, you should go look at it. He's great. And TJ actually talks a lot about the trust gap in higher education. There's a lack of trust in the entire industry that simply didn't exist 30 years ago. When I went to college, more than 30 years ago. And it's been getting progressively worse for the last 10 years. It's gotten a lot worse through COVID because of communications challenges, chaotic shifts to remote instruction, arguments over unfair bills and charges, and, bungled reopenings of institutions. And, colleges and universities really have to work to repair and renew trust in our colleges and universities in this country. And, hear me, this is not just about marketing. We can't just market ourselves in a way that will close the trust gap. Our behavior closes that gap. So we need to act in the best interest of our students. We have to ensure they get a strong ROI on their investment in our institutions. We have to live up to our promises. We have to provide them with the exceptional education that they deserve and expect. In addition to the basics that everyone knows about marketing, right? Like, you have to offer affordable, convenient programs in high demand fields. You need to differentiate. You need an integrated strategy. I really want to encourage institutions to focus on that trust gap, focus on closing it, because it's a real problem for the entire industry.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking with Chantal about. I stole that quote from Jeff Weiner, who coined the math equation of trust being consistency over time. And I think that it rings true for really any company, institution, program that's looking to gain momentum and word of mouth and growth over time. So that absolutely makes sense. Michael, when thinking about this in the context of brand, because now you have a lot more learners looking for online programs, but you also have a lot more programs creating online opportunities. So how do you think about the differentiation and the importance of brand at this moment?
I just want to double click actually where Elizabeth left off. I think that's the exact right point, right? Which is that brand is not what you say you are, it's what you actually do. And then the language reflects that, right? And so I think a lot of people, when they think about marketing and sales, they think about to the point of purchase, or in this case, enrollment, and they forget that actually fulfillment, and then what Elizabeth was talking about, that word of mouth, right? That promotion, the conversation that happens afterwards, your satisfied students or graduates, ideally, like those are your best marketers. And so if you set expectations when you enroll someone, and then you've got to fulfill them, that is the biggest thing right now in creating brand. And that's the thing that's going to differentiate schools ultimately. And I think one of the reasons that you see in Elizabeth's research that people struggle to name any institution beyond one in double digits, right, as being strong and online, such an interesting finding, by the way, is that so many of these brands are still very regional in nature. And even in the online market, they're actually becoming more regional in nature. We know that more and more students are enrolling in institutions 50 miles within where they live. And that suggests that power of brand is very locked up with the employer market, with the connections, with the who graduates and these social networks that form around your school. And so it's really important to be delivering on that full value proposition to really create that brand. That's where differentiation comes from, right? Is, serving a particular market, serving a particular region, and doing it really, really well. That'll build brand over time. And I think within regions may change the numbers of recognition, but perhaps not nationally. I think the national market of online outside of 5 to 10 institutions max is a bit of a myth. Yeah, that's completely rings true with what we're seeing as well. Elizabeth, did you have anything to add on brand? I know I didn't specifically ask about brand. You kind of went into it with trust, but is there anything in addition to what Michael mentioned that you're thinking about when working on the research or overall branding side with your clients?
I mean, back to the fundamentals, right? Differentiation and integration. You've really got to figure out what it is that's differentiating you and be able to convey that in very specific and real terms. I think, and then integrate that into your marketing program, obviously. I mean, those are the two key tenets of what branding is all about. And, I think the trap that too many fall into is describing the whole category. Right? Is that if you're an adult learner, in adult education, then you're talking about convenience and, skillifying and moving up within your organization. That defines the whole category. That's not differentiating, right? That's vanilla. It's chicken. Right? Who likes chicken? Nobody, right? You got to have a little sauce on your chicken, something special, right? So you really have to, go back to the basics and really go deeper, pull away more layers of the onion to really figure out what your brand identity is all about. And, frankly, brand is usually about people and culture. It's not about a different kind of offering. I mean, when you ride on a Southwest Airlines plane, you could take a different plane from location A to location B, but the experience is completely different on Southwest because of the people and the culture, right? It's the goofy little shorts, the funny jokes, it feels different, right? Higher education is very much the same way. It's about people and culture. I'm actually convinced that every single educational institution that exists has a unique culture, has their own set of people and values, and they are differentiated. What we need to do is have the intent and be bold to figure out what those differentiators are and put them out into the world, because I really believe that they are there. So we got to go back to the basics: differentiation and integration.
Amazing. Yeah. And it's so true. Like when you think about brand, there are just a real handful of businesses or schools or programs that come to top of mind. And I think that is why it becomes so important, is just to truly understand how crucial it is to be top of mind when people are trying to make these decisions. So absolutely agree with you there. All right. So appreciate all of the great conversation and feedback from both of you. I'm going to bring Chantel back on to go through some Q&A if we have a few minutes left for this, to hear from the audience.
Yes, we do. We have a lot of questions coming in, but before we get started with Q&A, we're going to actually just launch a poll. We want to know from you, what is the most insightful stat you heard from Elizabeth's presentation? And there were a lot, so I'm going to tell you. So here are your choices. 1 out of 2 respondents are more interested in higher ed as a result of COVID. 85% of LinkedIn members are highly interested in online education. Behind affordability, flexibility, high quality user online platform was the 3rd most important attribute. And 64% of LinkedIn members responded that they hope to enroll in the next 6 months. So we're going to launch the poll. Use your QR code. Tell us which you found to be the most insightful. I don't want to tip the scales, but I did get a sneak peek and look at the results. And what I found to be really insightful and surprising to me, and I would love to hear the panelists' feedback on this, was behind affordability and flexibility, the respondents were looking at user-friendly online platform. And that was surprising to me. I mean, I think that is just like such a reflection of the time. So I see you nodding your head, Elizabeth. So I don't know. I spoke to your team about that, and we all said that, wow, that was pretty surprising. And your team shared that was not something they've seen in other surveys that you've done before.
No, I think that's a very current phenomenon. I mean, think about what's happened in the last 8 months. We have learned how to run our entire lives online, right? We go to work online, our kids go to school online, we see our doctors online, we have happy hour online. We used to do a little bit of shopping online. Now we do all of our shopping online, right? We get our divorces finalized online now, right? I mean, everybody knows this. There's this exposure, right? And new comfortability with managing every single aspect of our lives remotely. And we know very well when it's convenient and when it's not. Right? I mean, we know a good platform when we see it, and we know a sucky one when we see it, right? And so, having a platform that's easy to use, especially because everybody's, doing everything that they, in their lives online now, I think is more important than ever. So I think that's why we saw that creep up into that real high level position of importance.
No, that's great. And Michael, I saw you shaking your head. Did you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, just briefly. Well, I know. I mean, I think it's so interesting as well, Chantal. And when I think about it, there's a model called Kano's model. If people want to Google it, Kano, and it basically says there's three types of performance-defining attributes: basic, performance, and then exciting. And the basic thing is that basic features, like, they're just table stakes. And these days, you need an online program that's flexible. And if you don't have that, you're not even in the conversation, right? And so now the performance-defining attributes are: is your platform usable? Is it actually, friendly, right? Does it work? Is it dependable? Is it a good experience? And that's where you get your, one for one ROI, right? The more you invest in the marketing language around it, the more you invest in improving it. And in fact, in actuality, you get better bang for the buck along that. And then those exciting features are the ones that you mentioned at the very end, just as someone is about to sign in the dotted line. Oh, did you know we also have connections to XYZ employer, right? Like things like that like seal the deal, if you will. But I think, the landscape has shifted, and what was once a performance defining feature, we have an online program that's basic now. That's table stakes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is the consumerization effect, where everyone is used to the things on Amazon and Google, et cetera. They're used to everything at their fingertips, and they're expecting that experience with everything. So we have quite a few questions. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the good news with everybody doing so much, running their lives online now is I do actually think it's going to open up new markets for adult online education, people who may never have considered it prior because they just weren't familiar with the tools and the platforms. Now that they're doing everything else online, it's like, oh, maybe I can do school too, where that may have been a mental barrier before. Mm-hmm. So I do think it's actually going to open up a lot of it may be contributing to why we're seeing, this big increase in interest in adult online programs.
Well, Elizabeth, you actually answered a question that someone had was, you mentioned the fact that, the disturbing stat of how many women are leaving the workforce because of COVID. I think I heard 900,000 women are leaving the workforce because of COVID. And you're anticipating this may be a growth opportunity after we've come out of this. Were there any other segments that came across in your research, and this is to you, Michael, as well, any other segments do you see that may be coming in the short term or even in the long term as a result of what's happening?
Oh, that's interesting. There weren't necessarily beyond that the women's professional audience, but just speaking to that one for a minute. Think about what's going to happen when these women figure out. They're taking on all the household responsibilities, right? That was the report that I saw, that all of these women have left the workforce because they're primarily taking responsibility for kids who are at home and educating them. These wonderful, smart women are going to figure that stuff out and fast. And then they're going to have more time on their hands, and they're going to think, well, I can't go back into a full-time position, but I've got this kid, these kids on lockdown now. We've got a system, and now I've got some time for me, and it's time to skill up, right? So I definitely think that, thinking about that female population and how to get them into the fold is a real big opportunity.
So I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think they're classic help me step it up, because they're going to look around them and they're going to be like, this isn't who I am, right? I'm not sticking here. It's time for me to step it up, and I'm going to show them, right? And so I totally agree with Elizabeth on that. I think the second one that probably wasn't captured in the survey just because of the age demo, that it was 25 to 55, is frankly that 20 to 24-year-old population. I expect them to move more into online. I don't think it'll be a flood that everyone, is no longer going to go to campus. Like Elizabeth's clearly right. Once the birthday parties are back in person, they'll do that. But I think for a not insignificant percentage, it's going to move the needle. Before this hit, we already saw that at places like a Southern New Hampshire University or Western Governors University, their average age was ticking down a little bit. They were seeing more 23, 24, or 22-year-olds come into the student group. I expect that number will go up and will not slide back that much.
Right. And speaking of the study, Elizabeth, we got quite a few questions. I'll take some, but I want to get your perspective as well. There are a couple of, we have a lot of international people that have dialed in, and they wanted to know if it was U.S. based. So I will answer that. Yes, it was U.S. based. But
unfortunately,
some of my colleagues in Canada and Latin America are also looking to replicate this study in other places. So look out for that. And
let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Exactly. And then someone else asked the question, how would you categorize the students? What was the cross-section of the people that responded? So LinkedIn members, somebody was asking, were just mid-career professionals, or was it a cross range of demographics that answered the questions?
It was a very broad range, very diverse in terms of age, gender, race, geography, employment status, household income, current industry. I mean, we basically went to a research panel to get the sample. So it's a very broad range. And you know what everyone should do is sign up for the December 3rd webinar, because we'll go into some of the more detailed analysis where we look at some of the findings by some of those discrete demographic factors. So join us then and we'll go into that in more detail.
Elizabeth, you're stealing all of my lines, but that's what you were saying. We just wanted to have, there's so much information that we were able to pull from this study. So on December 3rd, like Elizabeth said, we'll be going through it from soup to nuts. The other thing I want to shift to something that you said also around word of mouth, the impact that family and friends have. And for us, when you said that to me, that's like the network effect that we talk about at LinkedIn. Like, it's a network. People go to their colleagues, et cetera. And the other thing is like word of mouth. We were thinking about organic. We always talk to our clients about, yes, you have to have a paid strategy that helps, but how does your organic strategy work with that? So I'm going to throw it out to actually Andy first, because I know you talk about this a lot with our clients, and you could jump in as well. But just thinking about how, the network effect on LinkedIn, the use of alumni, other things besides paid media can help that with that strategy. So,
yeah. Well, I know one challenge a lot of schools run into is, how do you engage with previous students after they graduate, right? Like, a lot of them don't end up continuing to use their email address or the ways that you were contacting them while they were active students. And so LinkedIn is a fantastic place through things like the alumni tool, as you mentioned, Chantel, to be able to re-engage that audience. And they become really, really effective brand ambassadors on behalf of your institution. And so, we have a lot of great ways through the more organic side of things, through things like LinkedIn Live, where you can start to host events for current students, past students, upcoming students. And in doing so, you can, find ways to promote that out to audiences that you want to start engaging with. So you can start to evangelize and engage your alumni on LinkedIn in a way that you very likely can't in other places.
That's great. And we have a couple of more minutes. So I want to pivot actually to a topic that is very important now, diversity and equity. And I know, Michael, we talked about this a little bit with the work that you do with Guild, and you're talking to a lot of corporations, and you shared that a lot of companies are looking to higher ed to help them with their diversity efforts and equity efforts, specifically using it as a pipeline to get their employees to those higher levels. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? And I would love to hear from your perspective, Elizabeth, about the role that higher ed can play in this pivotal time. So.
Yeah, I'd love to address that. So what we're seeing is that companies are waking up to the fact that they can't just poach diverse candidates from other companies at the managerial levels and somehow grow the pie over time, right? And so if they want to be serious about this, they can look to their frontline workforce where diversity already exists, but historically they haven't invested in actually building up those folks and building them with skills so that they can become the managers and leaders in the company. And higher education can play a critical role in helping equip those employees with the skills, with the degrees, the credentials to help them make that movement up into the managerial and leadership ranks of the companies and actually create that pipeline for these companies. And we're seeing that as a significant point of emphasis that companies want higher education's help right now with in a very direct way as a strategic measure, not just to improve diversity for its own sake, right? That's obviously an incredibly important goal right now, but they know that having better diversity leads to better decision-making across the enterprise, and they know that's not something that they can ignore any longer.
No, that's great. And Elizabeth, I don't know if you have anything to add before we wrap.
Yeah, there's just loads of evidence that COVID in particular is affecting students of color more than other populations. So it's a group that we have to watch out for. This is, we have to find better ways to lift this segment of our society up and help, because it's scary, some of the data that I've seen on the adverse effects of COVID in particular on students of color. So higher education, I think, has a an obligation to really focus on increasing access and making sure that it actually acts as the lifeline that it should to help some of those families.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. We have so many more questions, but you stole my thunder, Elizabeth. We were going to September 3rd. We'll have Elizabeth back for an entire hour, and we've worked with Michael before. I'm sure we will have him on in the future as well. I just want to thank you, Elizabeth, Michael, and Andy, for a great conversation about how adult learners are approaching education in this evolving world. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.